want to let you know that this series that we're wrapping up today, Love, Sex, Marriage, is for everybody, especially on Valentine's weekend. We're sensitive to folks who, maybe they don't have that romantic relationship in their life, and they kind of feel, alone and alienated on Valentine's Day. What we've wanted to do every single week in this series is to state that everybody is included here. This series is for everybody, whether you're married or not, or dating, or single, or divorced, or widowed, or whatever it may be. And the core of what we're talking about, even today, is applicable to all kinds of life situations. So today, we're talking about love that lasts a lifetime. And I asked some couples in one church to share some love advice from their relationships. I'm going to read some of that later on. We plan to do a panel discussion today. Actually, if you remember, I announced that weeks ago, but then this move came up, and we just thought we're just going to keep it simple on the first day. And instead, some folks have shared some marriage wisdom that I'm going to read today. I also want to point out a couple of resources that we've talked about every week, a couple of books, Love to Stay by Adam Hamilton and The Zimzum of Love by Rob and Kristen Bell. They're great resources, especially for romantic relationships. A sermon is a shotgun approach. There's no way we could ever cover everything in a sermon series. And so if you're struggling, or if you just want to kind of brush up in your relationship skills, these are great resources for you. We believe that all relationships are sacred, that all relationships are spiritual, whether it's marriage or a friendship or parent-child, whatever it is. And the reason for that is that the core teaching of Jesus, the great commandment, is love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. So somehow the way we love each other is connected to how we love God. So all relationships, everybody we come in contact with, it's a sacred, spiritual interaction. And so the most important thing we could do in life is to understand how to make those relationships work better and how to respect the sacredness and the common humanity that we all share together. So, how to make love last a lifetime. The beginning of marriage is all about adjusting, right, married people? Especially the first year of marriage. I think I've told this story once before, but it's been a while, and for Hannah and I, it was no different. Our first year of marriage was this kind of cyclical process of me figuring out how to live with cats. And because Hannah had rescued some cats before we were married, 3 of them actually, and they were named Flora, Fauna, and Merriweather. And tragically, Fauna passed away before we were married. And so we had the 2 cats that came to live with us, Merriweather and Flora. Merriweather was like the good pet. She was always around, wanted to play, always visible. Flora hid under the bed until it was time to eat. That was the only time she came out. But Merriweather was the social one, and so every night before we would go to bed, we feed them, pet them, care for them, and then we would close our bedroom door. And, maybe 30, 45 seconds later, we would hear this scratching noise on the door, and on the door. And I had never lived with pets before, and I'm slightly allergic to cats. So that was just kind of the way that we're having flashbacks right now as we talk about it. That was just kind of the way that bedtime started every night, for the first year of marriage. And so I don't know what, a month or 2, whatever it was, into our marriage, we, the scratching and meowing had stopped, and so I was able to fall asleep. And I heard like a crash in the other room. Something hit the floor. And again, I'm not used to living with pets. I'm not thinking along those lines. I'm thinking somebody's robbing the house is what I'm thinking. So I just jumped up and sprung into action, in my underwear. And I'm going to go check out what's going on. Is our place being robbed? So I'm doing James Bond moves, peering around corners, this kind of thing, all ready to go into Chuck Norris mode. And I opened the door, and there's little Merriweather with her innocent eyes looking up, and something laying on the floor next to me. So I almost Chuck Norris'd a kitty cat, in our first year of marriage, because that was the adjustment process we had to go through. And I'm actually downplaying it. I was probably more dramatic than that, actually, and I was scared to death. So every relationship starts, with transitions and adjustments. So luckily, your first year of marriage doesn't last forever, amen? And there's a process of getting to know each other better and relating to each other better. And again, you can apply this generally to all relationships. But there are seasons of marriage. Seasons of marriage. There are seasons of joy. There are seasons of grief. There are seasons that are easy. There are seasons that are very difficult. I have a friend who's a runner. Most of us probably do. If you are a runner, great. If you don't, you probably have a friend who is. And he's preparing to run a 100-mile race for some reason. This summer. Like, why do people do that? And so he's been training for this 100-miler. And if you ask, runners, some runners will tell you the reason they love to run is because of a runner's high. How many of you have heard of runner's high? And runner's high is at some point in the race, maybe a half an hour, 45 minutes into a long race, and we're Portable Church, so we'll just deal with that, right? Whatever happens. As long as it doesn't explode, I'm happy, all right? And at some point in the race, they'll reach this point where they experience an endorphin hit. You know what I'm talking about? And there's this boost of energy that runners will experience. And they just kind of run on that high for as long as it lasts, sometimes, a great deal of the race. In 2008, some German scientists studied runner's high, and they discovered that during a long run, runners will feel this rush of endorphins similar to falling in love. Interesting. The body also, during runner's high, produces this chemical called endocannabinoids. Do you recognize a familiar word in there? Cannabis something. So runners, long-distance runners, will feel in love and like they're high. And they'll get the munchies, apparently, after the race. That's runner's high. Now, here's the takeaway. In order to get to runner's high, you have to kind of sludge through the initial difficulty of running, which I have never made it through, I don't think. And maybe that's true of many of us. You kind of have to just press on through. You have to get over the initial hump, the difficulty of running and the toll it takes on your body. Marriage, or any long relationship, is like a long-distance run. There is a place, we're going to look at research here in a minute, there is a place where you can experience a high, a bit of a marriage high, or a relational high. But the key is you have to get through the initial difficulty in order to get to that place. So we've looked at survey data from Love to Stay, and it's a survey that was taken of 5,000 people in the Church of the Resurrection in Kansas City. And it's a church similar to ours, people with questions and doubts, thinking people. And the methodology was verified by an outside organization. We're just going to roll with it, all right? Pretend that you're being hit by endocannabinoids right now. So, it's like a strobe light. Look very quickly at the numbers. Read very, very quickly. We'll just do this. You notice there's a trough, right? Okay. You're not... I'll just explain it. How about that? So, across the bottom, there are years that people have been married. Like 0 to 5 years, 5 to 10, 11 to 20, 21 to 40, 41 plus years of marriage. And marital satisfaction, those graphs, those bar graphs, are the level of marital satisfaction couples reported. Don't you love how I'm gesturing to a blank TV screen? The percentage of couples who said they were very satisfied with their marriage. So early on, in the first couple of years of marriage, the marital satisfaction was something like 58, 59%. Right? Everybody with me? I know we're dealing with technological issues. 58, 59% of newlyweds said they're very satisfied with their marriage. And then what happens is, after year 2, year 5, you see that trough. So the lowest reported levels of being very satisfied with your marriage is 11 to 20 years. So if you've been married between 11 and 20 years, that's the lowest trough in terms of marital satisfaction that people report. And so now it's kind of awkward, like, I don't feel that way, honey. Do you feel that way, honey? You know, right? When you hear a statistic like that. And so if you looked at the graph, the 7-year itch is true. Right around 7 years, it starts to dip. And you get into this time of lower, the LG no signal, apparently, I'm still pointing at that. It starts to dip, and marriage is difficult, at least relatively so, for people's lives. So, air conditioning, there we go. We blew a circuit, didn't we? Yeah, that's what happened. We overloaded. It's the one church way. I think we've done it in every place we've been in. Thanks, man. So, the runner's high, the marriage high, doesn't come until much later. You know, it's 30 to 45 minutes for a runner. In a significant relationship, it's years. And so if you are in that trough right now, that space where you're struggling in ways that you might find difficult to admit, and it might be hard for you to admit it to each other, it might be hard for you to admit it to people in a one group or something like that, guess what? You're normal. If you are struggling in some ways, according to the stats, you're normal. And we have to press on through to get to that runner's high. I was going to show you another graph, but I'll explain this one too. After having children, marital satisfaction drops by almost 20%. Let's have some good applause, real applause for Jackie. Very nice. Thank you, Jackie. After having children, marital satisfaction drops by almost 20 percentage points. Look at that. We have the graph back. Now, that's not something you want to talk about on family day when the kids are in here, right? Guess what? But it's just a reality of relationships. Again, we're talking about getting to a place of a high in our relationship and how we have to get through some difficult times to get there. Now, let's go back to that other graph. Look what happens as a marriage progresses. And again, it's true of any relationship. Like a long-distance race, there's an uptick in satisfaction in a relationship. Do you see that? Here's 21 to 30 years of marriage when it starts to go back up again. It's still not at the beginning yet, is it? 21 to 30 years of marriage, that's 31 to 40 years, 41 to 50, 51 plus years. Notice, at 41 to 50 years, marital satisfaction is almost up to where it was at the beginning. This isn't very romantic, is it? We're just being realistic, right? We're being realistic about relationships. And then look at this awesome thing that happens after 51 years of marriage. The satisfaction is actually a lot higher than it was at the very beginning. So here's the takeaway. It gets easier. It gets easier. As we run, as we progress through this long-distance race of a marriage relationship or a long-term relationship, a friendship of some kind, as you press through, it gets easier. It starts to get easier after 21 years, right? According to the percentages, right? Pastor Ryan's so encouraging. So we press through, but it gets easier. Well, how do you do that? How do you press through? How do you make it through? It's not 35 or 40 minutes or 45 minutes of running. It's a long time. You know, if you feel like, it's not quite as satisfying as it was at the beginning, how do you press through? Well, every week we've looked to the Bible for wisdom in this series, and One Church is a place where questions and doubts are welcome. We believe that the Bible has to be interpreted. We don't think you can just flop it open and point to a passage and just do that. You'll find yourself doing some pretty wild things sometimes, if that's your method of interpreting the Bible. But we do believe that there's wisdom in Scripture that can help us in our relationships. And we're going to read a passage today. It's from the Apostle Paul, Colossians chapter 3, verses 12 through 15. It'll be on the screen, and you can read along with me. And we're going to look at some words in this passage that might help us to press through and reach that relationship high. Let's read it. Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved. That's a good couple of words there, dearly loved. Clothe yourselves with compassion. It's a good word, isn't it? Compassion. Kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Bear with one another and forgive one another. If any of you has a grievance against someone, forgive as the Lord forgave you. And over all these virtues, there's another good phrase, put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, since as members of one body, you were called to peace, and be thankful. What words stick out to you in that passage? What words do you find there that could be helpful for a couple who's struggling to press through? And maybe there are some things that they wouldn't really want to admit, but they're kind of struggling. They're in that trough, but they want to press through and get to that relationship high. What are some words, some phrases that might help those couples or any relationship? What about you are dearly loved by God? How would it affect a relationship? Let's say it's a married couple. If each of them knows they are dearly loved by God, how does that affect a relationship? When they're not looking to each other to fulfill needs that they're not able to fulfill, but both of them know, I'm dearly loved by God. I'm a loved person. And you start there. And that's the foundation for our relationship. I deserve love. You deserve love. Compassion, which means to suffer with somebody. How can compassion help a couple to press through? Kindness. Doing good things for somebody, whether you think they deserve it or not. Kindness. Humility. Being willing to not see myself as better than somebody else or not less than somebody else, but on an equal playing field with somebody else. How can humility help a couple to press through? Gentleness, when words need to be spoken that are hard to speak. Gentleness. Patience. Bear with one another. That's not a very romantic phrase, is it? Bear with one another. It's about, just like we're both human and we're navigating this thing together. And we have to press through together. We're running together in this race. Not alone, we're together. But we have to bear with one another and forgive. Forgiveness is one of the hardest things to do. But in forgiving, somebody is freed. And who is freed? We are. When we withhold forgiveness, it's like we're what's the saying? You drink poison waiting for the other person to die, right? Is that it? But forgiveness, how could that help a couple to press through? And then putting on love, which ties all the rest together. How can I love this person the way this person needs to be loved? We talked about what love might mean earlier in the series, like self-sacrifice and connectivity, connecting with this person. How would that kind of love help a couple to press through? So I asked some couples in one church for their input. And some couples responded, and they've been married for various lengths of time. And they had some good info to share about how to press through and how they've gotten to where they are. And so one couple was a couple who's been married for 15 years, and they knew each other for 3 years before they got married. And so they're in the 11 to 20 year graph, right now. And so the husband said, early in their marriage, we both struggled with our professional career path early in our marriage. We both took time away from college to figure out what we really wanted to do. And during that time, we were supportive of each other, but didn't allow the other not to have a job if they weren't going to school, right? So there's some compromise, but they supported each other. So I see compassion, I see kindness, I see patience in that answer. I asked, what's one thing you've learned about your spouse, how to relate to your spouse that's made a big difference? And he writes, she actually loves me for who I am. We're able to talk about everything and vent to each other, knowing the other will listen and be supportive. I see the humility to listen there in giving love. I asked, how has your relationship grown? He said, I used to regret the choices I made earlier in my life and wished I had figured things out sooner. At one point, I realized that if I was actually able to change anything in my past, I may not have met the woman I married or wouldn't be the person she fell in love with. Isn't that cool? After this, I accepted everything in my life because I would never want to lose her. Isn't that great? In that answer, I hear the recognition that he's loved by God. You see that? Instead of regret and questioning, but he's loved by God. I asked, what makes love last? And he said, being there for your spouse and putting their needs before yours. Kindness, bearing with one another. last question I asked, what would you say to encourage a couple who is struggling right now? And he said, ask for help. Talk to your friends. Break the power of secrecy. They may have gone through similar issues. And talk to each other and be honest with one another, which would include some bearing with one another. Is that good? And here's what his wife wrote. She agreed. We both took the scenic route through college. Been there, I can identify. And she said, as we were finishing our degrees after we got married, there were difficult times, both financially and in making sure we had time for each other. Whatever struggles we faced over the years, we always faced them as a team. And she mentions how learning his personality type was helpful to her. Back months ago, we did a series called My Type about personalities. And she said that learning his personality type changed how she related with him. It helped her understand him and his perspective, where he was coming from. She said, we've established a deep trust in each other, evidenced by 18 years of experiences, where we've both demonstrated our love to each other. I've come to appreciate over the years that he truly wants me to be happy. And he'll do whatever he can to make that happen, just as I would do for him. This helps create a safe place for us to express our feelings. And she says, miraculously, as we've both grown and changed throughout the years, we've grown together. They're realizing they're on the race together. She says, be open and honest in your communication with your partner. Realize it's okay to say you're frustrated. Odds are your partner will want to help you however he or she can. So that's a couple that's been married for 15 years. There were some other couples who gave input. Just kind of stepping aside for a second, we have some guests here this morning from our sponsor church back in Aurora, Ohio, the church in Aurora. And Garland and Donna Ridgely and their daughters, they've been married for 35 years tomorrow. They're on the, he says they're on the upswing right now. So welcome to you guys. There's another couple in one church who has been married for 42 years. And I asked them for their input, and this is what they shared with me. So if you want to make a marriage last for 42 years, here's some information. It says, we believe the secret to a successful marriage starts with good communication. Love, devotion, and being each other's best friend. We enjoy our family as well as our church family. We share common interests like religion, shared values there that we talked about in this series. Love of cooking for each other, shared activities, and being able to share with friends and neighbors, camping, fishing, road trips. We compromise when needed and learn to admit when we're wrong. And then they sent a Tanya Tucker song on YouTube that I posted on our Facebook page. It's a song called Strong Enough to Bend. And the point of the song is, a tree sways with the wind. If it doesn't bend with the wind, it'll break. And so they said that's an illustration for their marriage, that they've been able to kind of bend in their marriage and compromise and negotiate and bear with one another and do all these things to make it to 42 years strong. And I asked them if I could share their name to celebrate today. So this July, Ed and Linda Moore will have been married for 42 years. How cool is that? Yeah. So Colossians 3 is full of action steps. Paul says, clothe yourselves, do these things. They're not feelings, they're actions. And so last, Adam Hamilton says it this way: how do you make it to the relationship high? You do love until you feel love. You do love until you feel love. This is how you press through the difficulties of the initial years of marriage and adjusting to get to that relationship high. Love is something you do. If you let your feelings determine your actions, you'll always be going in different directions and feeling scattered and blown around like you're being blown around in the wind, because feelings come and go. But love is a choice. Colossians 3 is a choice. Now, this is proven in cognitive behavioral therapy as well. There's evidence to back this up. Cognitive behavioral therapy is, if I change the way I think, that'll change the way I feel, and that'll change the way I act. You with me? And so if I start with how I feel, I feel this way, so this is what I have to do. First of all, you don't have to do that. Your brain doesn't have to work that way. But secondly, that's going to lead to probably never reaching the relationship high. And we don't want to pile on. I mean, we have people from all kinds of relationship backgrounds here. And there are times we would have done things differently, or maybe we did all we could. And so we're not going to pile on people if you didn't reach that relationship high. But for those of us who want to, We don't have to be a slave to our feelings. The way you think determines the way you feel, and then that determines the way you act. And you can love your way into feeling in love again. Rob and Kristen Bell are a couple who authored a book called The Zim Zum of Love. Rob Bell's a pretty well-known pastor. They're going to be on Oprah later today, Super Soul Sunday. She's going to interview Rob and Kristen about this book, The Zim Zum of Love. It's a marriage relationship book that they wrote together that I talked about earlier. And here's how they close their book, The Zim Zum of Love. When they were both 38 years old, they already had two boys who I think were like 9 and 11 and 9 and 12, something like that. They were surprised with the knowledge that they're going to have a third child. And, both 38. And 5 months into the pregnancy, Kristen woke up in the middle of the night unable to breathe. She felt like she was drowning. She woke up in a panic. And, of course, Rob freaked out, and they called, the ambulance, and they went to the ER. And they really couldn't do much for her as far as answers. They said they hadn't really seen many cases this bad. They called it pregnancy-induced asthma, and they sent her home with an oxygen tank 5 months in. So for the next 4 months of her pregnancy, she was basically, confined to bed rest with an oxygen tank. She said frequently she would wake up in the middle of the night unable to breathe. There would be points during the day where she felt like she was drowning. She said she felt absolutely helpless. And she said for the first time in their marriage, she had to learn how not just to give love, but to also receive love. Because for the first time, she wasn't able to do the things that she was used to doing. A lot of chores and taking care of the kids and all the things, of course, that she was used to. She wasn't able to do them anymore. And Rob had to go, grocery shopping and do all the things that she had done in the past. No going out. She was completely dependent on him for the remainder of her pregnancy. She said for the first time in her marriage, she felt like she had nothing to give. She could only receive, and it was a humbling experience for her. And it was a journey for her to learn to be vulnerable and to allow herself to be open enough to Rob that she could receive love from him as well and drop any walls of defensiveness or protectiveness that she had built in her life and accept the fact, as Paul says, that she is somebody who is dearly loved by God. And a relationship is a two-way street, both of giving and receiving love. And then they end the book like this, with a profound and true idea that your marriage or whatever relationship you find yourself in is bigger than the two of you. It means more to other people. It means more to society even. It means more to our world. It means more to the universe than just how the two of you are getting along or how the two of you feel in the moment. Listen to how they end their book. They write, "We're spiritual beings, reflecting the image of the God who is one. And when you commit to another and then continually extend grace to each other, all these qualities we talked about, year after year, conflict after conflict, the love between you becomes a grounded center from which love flows outward. As you allow this divine love to flow between you, it inevitably flows through you, spilling over into the world around you. There's a lot that's broken in the world, a lot that isn't won. From war and racism and injustice to abuse and addiction and people taking each other to court and families breaking apart, we live in a broken, fractured, and fragmented world. But when you are faithful to each other, zimzumming, and that just means making space for each other, zimzumming as you act for the well-being of the other, the space between you becomes a place in the universe that isn't broken and divided, but one and whole. This is why the world needs marriage. More marriages, better marriages. The world needs more places that are one and whole. Isn't that beautiful? Great marriages shine. They stand out They inspire. They bring hope. They speak to our deepest desires for a world that is one.